Leaders carry the privileged responsibility of discovering, developing, and deploying that hidden talent. To discover it, I'm looking for it, to help that individual develop it, to release it, to grow it, to maximize it, and then to get it out and to get it into use.
You can't be an exceptional leader without becoming an exceptional developer of talent. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Chip Toth, founder of LeadersInspire. Chip has been in a number of roles throughout his career. He's worked in sales, he's led a nonprofit, and he's been a senior leadership consultant. The things that are on Chip's resume would impress many, but it's what's not on his resume that brings him to the podcast today. There's a funny saying in athletics that when somebody's truly at the top of their game, when they're world class, the saying is this: you can't stop him, you can only hope to contain him. And that is true with regard to Chip Toth when it comes to mentoring and developing people one-on-one. In my over 20 years of experience in leadership development, he is the best I have ever seen. And that is why I'm so excited for you to hear from him today. As we engage, you'll get a chance to hear his worldview, and you'll get a chance to hear his perspectives on what it means to truly listen and just how intentional he is as he engages with others. But first, we get to hear from Chip about people and situations that have shaped his thinking about leadership, including an extra spot at the dinner table and a big pill he was invited to swallow early in his life.
I've got to go right back to my mother. I've not heard many men talk about their mothers, right? I've referred to my mother as the Dorothy Toth, as the Mother Teresa of the West. She cared deeply for people and had a broad network, broad circle of people that she would reach out to. As a kid, I'd come in from playing outdoors as just a child, and there's 8 in our family, and there'd be 9 place settings at the table. I'd say, "Mom, what's up?" There's 8 of us. And she'd say, "Well, I met this dear lady on the drive home who had a flat tire, and I helped her with her tire, and she's coming to our house for dinner." And this would happen regularly with my mother. She had a heart for people, and she could show it. We had great means, I would say, as a family, and yet wealth and status never seemed to move her heart at all. She just loved people and loved us well. And so I'd say my mother had a huge impact on me. I think my mother loved her 6 kids toward heaven, and my dad beat the hell out of us. Thankfully, it's figurative. Dad was an athlete, a businessman. He's entrepreneurial, brought professional hockey to our city. Mom would give us hugs, and then whatever bar we were getting over in athletics or academics or whatever, business, Dad would raise the bar. He had very much a competitive drive that we all got a taste of in our home culture. Mom kept it kind and warm, and Dad just drove us hard. So that's probably better said than beat the hell out of us, right? And then in college, a guy named Jim Payton at my university, he was mentoring young leaders. That was his business with us. And Jim was the first guy. He took me under his wing for about 3 years, sophomore year to senior year, and mentored me in all aspects of life. Jim was the first guy in my life that ever said, "Hey, Toth, I love you. I didn't know how to swallow that big pill. I love you." My dad had never said that to me, but then Jimmy backed that up by affirming gifting in my life and potential and attributes and this kind of stuff. So I'm forever indebted to Dottie Toth and Jim Payton, I would say.
Here you are now at this point in your career and life, and I'm so excited to have you share with folks that are listening about your perspectives on one-on-one development. Because in my experience and observation, and at this point, I've got over 20 years of it in the leadership development space, a lot of frequent flyer miles to go along with it. I have not encountered anybody that I have observed that is better in one-on-one development than you are. So I am so excited for people to learn a little bit more about how you approach this. So talk a little bit about your perspectives on one-on-one development.
In our leadership model, the leadership tree, we talk about a leader's worldview, a human being's worldview, that set of beliefs and assumptions that they hold consciously and unconsciously, but how the world operates and how they show up and operate in that world. And as I've tried to unpack what deep assumptions or beliefs drive the way that I engage people, I've got 3 basic beliefs. The first belief is that everyone I meet, everyone that you meet, has unrealized talent, that everybody has talent that they've not yet understood or discovered. When I was a kid, there were this little box of treats called Cracker Jacks. And my mom would give us a box of Cracker Jacks, right? And I would just dump the thing out on the table because I wanted the prize. That's my basic belief that deep within every human being, every leader, is some prize, some talent that is yet to be discovered. And I've got to tell you, as I've been talking this to in deep coaching work with CEOs and people that are in the C suite, guys will say to me privately, they'll say, you know what? I know I've got more in there, but I sense that it's like in a vault with chains and locks all around it. And that thing is yet to be released. Whether it be permission to release it, or people have said, you don't have enough, or it's not good enough, or you don't have it, but you know you've got it right. And so that belief drives me that there's just everyone I meet, even the gifted pro athlete, the gifted CEO, the gifted human being, the speaker, whatever, the singer, that there's just more in there. I believe that.
All right. So that's the first one.
The second belief I have, Tim, is that leaders carry the privileged responsibility of discovering, developing, and deploying that hidden talent. To discover it, I'm looking for it, to help that individual develop it, to release it, to grow it, to maximize it, and then to get it out and to get it into use. With that responsibility that leaders carry, we find ourselves watching other people with a search for talent, a bias that there's talent in there and we're searching for it, we're looking for it. That's a responsibility that we have. And I like to ask leaders, I asked this question to a leader just a few days ago, and they're in the construction industry. And I asked them this question, I said, do you use people to build projects or do you use projects to build people? This guy was an experienced project manager on the field. He said, I've probably been using people to get my projects done. But if we flip that thing over and we're building great people that are maximizing their gift and talent in the right spaces, marshaling resources in the right way, how much more for that individual and how much more for our organization, our productivity revenue goes through the roof. So I really think that's a responsibility that leaders have got to own, to discover and develop and deploy that talent.
Now I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, Chip. The first two, I'm like, wow, what's number three?
Number three is, and I think this is something that's unique to the leadership DNA. We leaders have the words, when well crafted, and they magnify that talent, enlarge it so people can see it for themselves. We can alter someone's life and career trajectory and outcome for great good. That's my worldview. They've got more than they know. It's my responsibility to help them know it and see it. And then I'm going to help them like build that thing, that talent, and maximize its impact.
And in the end, there's a life-altering impact when we do that as leaders.
Let me tell you a story about Georgia. A client of mine somewhere on the East Coast in a big city is like a brilliant mind with analytics and spreadsheets, and he's leading his company, but he likes too much alone time in his office, right? Just running spreadsheets, expenses, and running a financially sound business. People don't know if he gives a rip about them. That's the feedback he's gotten. So I visit him in this big city and we go out to his favorite dinner spot and the waitress comes and takes our order and we're talking business stuff and growing his leadership more. And I asked the waitress, I go, excuse me, but what's your name? She said, Georgia. And she took our order. I said, hey, before you go to take our order, I said, Georgia, if you had your dream job, what will you be doing 5 years from now? I'd love to hear that. Her eyes got real big and she said, whoa, never been asked that before. And off she went. I turned back to my client friend, the corporate guy. He looks at me, he goes, you should not have asked her that. I go, why is that? He goes, I'm sure you offended her. Like her current job is not good enough. And that 5 years from now, she's got to be doing something different. And I just smiled. I said, let's just play out this social experiment and see how it goes. So we do our lunch and we locked into his business stuff and financials and backlog. And so she comes back a little bit later with our order and she looks at me and she says, I got to tell you, I cannot stop thinking about that question. I paid her a compliment in there somewhere. I said, you're a very strong communicator. You're very customer centered. You're very clear. You seem to take real interest in us, even though it's just food. And I paid her a couple of compliments before she took off earlier. She comes back. She said, what I've done since I took your order is I called my sister up and I asked her to meet me in my house after work today. And she's going to help me and my daughter move out of that house because I'm in an abusive relationship. And two, she says, I'm going to enroll in a local college here and take communications courses. I think I could be a great communicator and do something more than this. I took interest in her life and paid a word of encouragement, and she's off and running. My worldview would be analyze what's in there, what message can I deliver based on what I see that they may not see, analyze, build, and finally communicate. I've had too many corporate guys say, I see all the good in my employees, I released this encouragement. Like, were you born stupid or did you develop stupid along the way? I said, encouragement has a short shelf life, doesn't it? People need a whole lot more.
Yeah. Here's what's amazing to me as I hear those three aspects of your worldview is I'm so excited now, even more so than before we started the discussion, to hear what's coming next, because this is the foundation from which this guy, being you, Chip Toth, coaches and develops others from. So this is his starting point. If that's where we're going to start, what does he do? How does he engage with others? So walk us through how that worldview then shows up in the practical ways as you're coaching and mentoring people one-on-one.
So I've been thinking about this. And hey, if I could sneak in a fourth worldview belief out of order here, right? It's that everyone has value, everyone matters. So I can tell you the story about doing this with a corporate guy or gal. And I can tell you a story about my Uber driver from Vietnam, who I asked him the same question. He started to cry and said, no one's ever taken interest in me before. Someday I wish I could own my own taxi. So if we can see people on same level, apart from titles and wealth and stature, I think that'll get us closer to pulling this stuff off, to engage all humanity.
I'm glad you added number 4 in there because it's an important one that really feeds and supports the rest of it. So you've set us up foundationally for how you engage with others. Now talk to us a little bit about what that looks like in your day-to-day investment you're making with people one-on-one.
I'm strong on initiating the relationship with strangers or with people that I've known, but I'm really strong on initiating conversation and relationship with people. Someone's got to be on the initiating side. There's a joke in my extended family. My wife's sister, they're in Nova Scotia. When we came to visit, she warned her daughter's fiance, when you meet Mr. Toth, he's going to ask you questions. And then they were all prepared that he's going to try to take you to a deeper place. There's just sort of this rumor going around.
I can vouch for this, by the way. I've been with you and around you enough.
And I'll tell you why in a moment, but I'm searching for either an area of common interest or an area that's just important to them. I'll take the first one if I get it, be on common turf together, as they say, or just important to them. So I study people, Tim. When I see people, when I'm out in public or in the airport, I'm just scanning people. And I'm looking for what I call interest clues. The sports hat, Eagles, Buffalo Bills, the t-shirt, the car they drive, the license plate, the Argyle socks. I study people and I'm looking for something to just strike up a level 1 conversation. Hey, Philadelphia Eagles, and a little joke, or the Buffalo Bills, they can't get by Mahomes in Kansas City, right? Or whatever that is. And I'm just looking to get us started there with level 1. How are you? And then let's take this a little bit deeper and seek a greater meaning. And that'll be what I call the power of the second and third questions. I got to tell you, most people that ask me, how are you? I'm fine. What do you do? Consulting, coaching. The questions never come after that. However, I'll tell you how it works. When I ask that second, third question, always, there's a lot more from deep within that's coming out of people back in my direction. And it's just how it is. I guess part of this too is that as leaders, we have a high and a deep and a selfless commitment to being others focused, to making ourselves servants of people. I leverage questions around my study of the person as much as I can get information I can gather and to try to get into their world and probe in there a little bit.
Let's talk about those second and third level questions a little bit, because ultimately, I do think all of the worldview perspectives is the foundational stuff to operate out of. But I can just hear some of our folks in my mind who are listening saying, what would a second or third order question be?
Tim, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm getting a chance to visit with a really smart guy right now.
You're being generous and kind. But let me ask you, you're doing great. What's going so well in your life? Some people say, I'm just fine. Or one guy says partly cloudy. But you say great. What's great in your life? And that's an example of a second question.
You're just keying off of what I gave you.
I want to hear more. And then whatever you give me next, you might say, my work's going well. And most of us are going to just drive away from that second answer.
What's going well about it?
Let me say here to you and to our friends that are listening, there's 2 essentials that I've identified here that have got to be in place. Number 1, our needs as leaders and our interests and our concerns have got to be in a healthy space that allow us to drive and maintain a focus on other people. If my needs are not met and my concerns are great and I don't have any space to kind of park those in and go, I'm okay, and they're okay, secure and settled, if you will. If that stuff's not in a good space, I can't pull this off.
Sometimes we have some work that we've got to do within ourselves before we're going to be able to be focused in a healthy way.
The leaders that were sent to me who came to me and said, Chip, we love this or that about your leadership and these different organizations that I led, but you're in the way. There's stuff in you that's messing with this thing being even greater. And those are messages that I had to really do the hard work. There's something in me that craves attention, recognition, power, control, and it's messing with everything that could be good here. I was not secure and settled. The second one is that interest and concern. When we ask that second, third question, it must be pure and it must be genuine. I've learned this. In that second and third question, those moments, that other person's going to take a brief but searching look into our eyes to determine if we are really interested in them or just performing some management technique or how to win friends and influence people practice. They're asking that just in a moment, do you really care to know more? And that read they take is going to determine how far they'll go with us.
You're suggesting, Chip, that we actually have to care about other people in order to engage with them. That seems to be an implication of what you're saying.
People are more discerning than we have understood. There's what's real and what's not real, what's authentic, what's inauthentic.
There's a little bridge I'd like us to walk across here, because one of the things that feels very easy to apply from this conversation is how I am engaging with people that I don't already know. You've mentioned a waitress or a waiter, Uber driver, somebody I might run into in the airports and have an opportunity to make an impact with them. But what does this look like in day to day? Let's say I'm a district manager or I'm the president of the company and engaging with my executive team. What does it look like to apply this in relationships that I'm engaged with on a regular basis?
It shows up in the day to day and looking even there. People that we have helped them identify their talents and gifting. We've been with them for a year or 10. Some of my clients, they've been with their VPs and so for 20, 30 years. And yet they continue to affirm what's good and true, the contribution that that individual is making. We don't take this stuff for granted. I may be a little bit clunky here, but I call them relationship advancing moments. The RAM in your computer is supposed to have enough RAM memory that we can process things more quickly. And so relationship advanced moments where I'm an alongside with these people in my life, personal, professional, and I walk with them in their highs and lows of life. And this is where I think we transcend the professional relationship and augment it with the personal connection that fires up the professional relationship. It's not why we do it, but it's just true. So if you were to look at my calendar today, over the last week, you'd see that last Wednesday, I've got a note to myself to text a client on the West Coast whose wife was having an MRI that day. We went beyond our business relationship to check in on his wife's MRI results, and they came back very positive, meaning there's some bad stuff in her body. And I'm walking with him now. And what I've learned is that when we walk with people through their highs and lows, we celebrate their victories, we walk with them in their losses and failures and mistakes, right? And collapses, the relationship advances significantly during that season of time. I liken it to a window that has opened. They're open now because they're in a significant life event. But when that event closes down, the advancing opportunities go with it. So I really pay attention to what I call these relationship advance moments. I honor them. I keep track of them. And I go to Facebook and I say, happy birthday to Joe. Joe's got 100 of those on his page, right? What I do with birthdays is I'll send an email and I'll give them 10 bullets of all the appreciations I have. I'm so glad that I get to be on the earth in this period of history next to them with all this gifting that they have. That's different than happy birthday, Joe.
So many good ideas, so many good thoughts here. I can't help but think that there are so many underpinning things here to what you're talking about. We talked about a few of those earlier around worldview, but something ironically that is screaming behind the scenes of all of this is the idea of listening. It is the baseline to this tune that you're singing about individual engagement. Talk to us a little bit about how you see the idea of being a great listener.
I'm a work in process. I spent decades far out of this area of listening, needing to be the guy that had the voice and the final answer. And people tried to give me feedback on that.
I'm interrupting you. I realize you're just getting ready to say something, but I don't want people to miss it because they might hear your story and think, Chip's just born this way. That's just the way he's oriented. He's just been a massively incredible developer of people and in one-on-one conversations his whole life. And what you just said is that when it comes to listening, you have spent appreciable time in your life missing the mark, that it was something that you had to become over time, and you had to get away from being the person with the answer or the final comment. Thanks for your transparency. But secondly, as you get ready to share what you're about to, I want everybody to lean in a little bit, because this is not just Chip automatically has this. This is something that you have worked on. And to me, that should cause us all to sit up a little straighter and, ironically, listen a little harder.
And with your preamble, I came out of my mother's womb shouting to be heard. Some measure of selflessness to listen well, genuine interest, if not joy, in hearing somebody else's story. Tim, to your leadership model, curiosity, a bias against assumptions, a portfolio of thoughtful questions that help others understand their own narrative. All that I think is part of the mindset of listening. I have been curious for years. How do things work? What drives people, their behavior, the narrative that people are playing out today? What's driving that? I think we need to have that curiosity. And I think the big one here is what you mentioned so well, getting over my need as a leader to be perceived as smart or powerful, and especially my need to be right. So we have a second home in the South, and we had a new neighbor over that my wife was getting to know. So she and her husband came over for dinner. And this neighbor had the gift of gab. She could gab. She talked and talked. And I looked at my watch at one point, 2.5 hours in, she hadn't come up for air. She just talked and talked. Maybe we're getting at this. Listening intently is work. It's not about you, it's about them. And we were at the 2.5 hour stage. And I looked over at my wife and I was hoping to see disapproval. To my dismay, on Jennifer's face, she's got her eyes locked in on our neighbor. She's got this beautiful smile on her face, like, just keep bringing it. Here's the paradox that I've been saying to CEOs and presidents of companies, who have believed and been trained by the former generation, maybe, our mentors, that leaders talk, they direct, they tell people what to do, and they take charge. When leaders learn to quiet down, and when leaders learn to leverage curiosity with good, thoughtful questions, their influence goes up. And that seemed to be like a bolt of lightning for many of us.
Tease that out for us a little bit, because there's something that sounds counterintuitive. And yet I suspect that for many people, when we hear the words, it feels counterintuitive, but there's also something in my spirit that says, that seems right. How could it be that my influence could increase as I manage myself to say less as a leader?
There's an assumption here, which you're teasing out, which is that if the leader, if she or he is inwardly sound, principled, purposeful, self-aware, secure and settled, and if she or he is others focused, attentive, curious, humble, empathic, if that's in place, your influence is not through your mouth. Your life is having huge influence, more than you understand. And the ripple effect is going well beyond the people that are in your immediate circle of influence. And if that's in place, quieting down actually will draw more people to you. Your attractability goes up. And when you speak, it's just weighted by this life that empowers it.
I'm so glad that you unpacked that, because there's a caveat in there which says, if you're inwardly sound and others focused, restraining yourself, pausing your comments, leaning in to be a better listener and not having to say more can cause your influence to go up. But it's the caveat that's so critical here, which is to say, if you're inwardly sound and others focused. If you're not, it's entirely possible that you could quiet down and maybe not experience that same elevation of influence, because it is these two things that cause us to be trusted by others. And so the kind of foundation that comes before even my ability to kind of restrain the number of words that I use is, am I a trustworthy leader? If I am, and now with that trustworthiness, I'm leaning in to listen, and I'm really engaged with others in their story, which requires me to oftentimes not say as much. Now that more trustworthy person shows up. And now, because of all of that equation around trustworthiness, when I show up with not voluminous leader all the time talking language, that trustworthiness can cause that quiet part of me to be more influential. It's really an important idea.
It's well said. This listening to speaking ratio, I've asked a number of leaders too, what do you think it should be? How much you speak, how much you listen. And most men are saying to me, it's 80-20, 90-10 that I speak and 10% that I listen. And I said, what do you think it should be? And most of these guys will say, if I could get to 50-50, it would be a miracle.
You mentioned men specifically. Do you find the ratio to be different with men and women who are in leadership positions?
I think women have figured out a better balance in most cases. They just seem to be able to tune in and live out the other's focus better than some of us guys. In some cases, just saying. And just to stretch the heck out of this thing, but I think a better ratio is maybe 20-80. I said it earlier. If you've learned, and it takes time and skill and training, maybe it's the 10,000 hour rule to become an expert in asking that question, that one question for that 60-minute meeting that takes that person in a whole nother direction. When there's a big pause after one of my questions, I know we're in a game-changing moment here. Or when the person says, I've never been asked that before, and they say, wow, the value of a diamond level question to help a leader rethink or elevate his game, her game is huge. I was a big follower of the San Antonio Spurs for years. I'm an avid fan of Coach Popovich. I'll quote him. He said, as he's developed a team of players that were well down in the draft order, he said, we're looking for guys who have gotten over themselves. That's what people are looking for in leadership.
All right. As we begin to round the corner here for home, I know that there is a little bit of a rock in your shoe around this idea of quote unquote soft skills. Let's hear from Mr. Toth. So tell me what your thoughts are when I say that term, soft skills.
When leaders respond, it's the men, and they say, soft skills, they just start choking on it. And they say, oh yeah, I need to do more kumbaya moments with my people. I just vomit. I'm just going to lay it out here. These are men who are not familiar, comfortable, or have experience going deep with other people, especially men with men. I suggest the true and mature adult male is sufficiently secure and settled to engage other people with attentiveness, curiosity, empathy, humility, and selfless service that demonstrates itself in real deeds. That's the true mature adult, the leader.
Now, you're leaning pretty hard into the male-female difference here as I'm hearing your language. You're calling out the guys here in a unique way.
I've got a heart for men who lead, and they've got to hear this stuff. If you want to call it soft, if you don't get this soft down, you cannot drive the hard. The others-focused leader has the greatest credibility and impact to deliver the difficult messages that every organization needs. If I don't have that in place, they're going to be like, the guy hates us, or he drank too much, or he had a Mexican lunch today. He's just off. It's not kumbaya. I think it's secure and settled adult maturity. For Jimmy, my mentor years ago when I was in college, to say, to deliver for the first time, I love you, and to back it up with a life of service in my direction as my mentor. And he still says that to me today, by the way. I need guys in my life who can affirm what's good and true and helpful in my life. I would just make a brief comment here to say, as these words of leaders are weighted heavily based on level of influence in the relationship or position or power or title, those words are weighted heavily for good and great gain. They also are weighted heavily for damage and harm to other people. I had a dinner with a client in Florida, and he lamented that he had lost his love for his business, and he had built this very successful company. But he said, I've got 7 vice presidents who don't bring their voice to our weekly management meetings. He said, would you fix them? I said, I don't fix people, but I flew into that city, and they showed me into the boardroom. And I tell you, when I walked in the boardroom, the 7 sat there very quietly when I walked in, screaming volumes of information to me. A group that's been together for 25 to 30 years, yet quiet. He walks in after I did, and one of the guys said, you should not sit there. In comes the CEO. He sits on the throne at the head of the table. And literally for 50 to 60 minutes, he beat the snot out of him verbally. He said, I brought in all the blue chip accounts. I'm the one that has been innovative and strategic and entrepreneurial. You guys have not. And he did this for literally 50 minutes. I'm watching the group, the VPs, and their faces had turned just white. The power of his words for discouragement. He turns to me and he goes, Chip, they're all yours. And he walked out of the room. Dead silence. And what do you do in a moment like that, right? So I began to work with them on recovery. The CEO, let's call him Fred, he said, we have Fred fatigue. We've been here for 25, 30 years. We can't leave. We got the golden handcuffs. And one guy's on stress drugs. Another guy has ulcers. Down the road, 3 months in, I'm doing executive coach with all 7, a few other up and coming leaders, and the CEO. And 3 months in with the CEO on a phone call, one-on-one, I said, I found your answer. He goes, what's that? I said, you asked me to help you figure out why they're so quiet. It's you. And I just tried to unpack what in him was so damaging and muting for his entire seven. He said, you're wrong, Chip. It's them. And I came back and said, no, you got to listen to me. Let me try to unpack that a little bit with a little more detail about how you're in the way of them and your company being even more successful. He came back even harder. He was mad. I came back a third time and he hung up the phone and he shut down all the business. Now, there's two things I want to say here. One, I witnessed the lethal impact of a leader who's not secure and settled, who's not others focused. But I also experienced that my living in a secure and settled place and being others focused enough, I could come at him and deliver the hard message. And I did it, and I slept well that night.
That's a sobering story because it really is a challenge for all of us to think hard about receiving feedback that is honest, coming from trustworthy sources. And will we be open to make sure that we don't end up in a spot where we're hanging up the phone on the very thing that we need to hear? All right. So there's been gem after gem during our discussion. And in our final push here, are there any caveats that are important to keep in mind as we seek to be great mentors and great developers of people one-on-one?
You bet. Lest this be just one man, one leader's story and gems, right? Can we broaden this to more of a global research, holistic message that we got from the Korn Ferry Leadership Architect Group? And these are the people that have developed what they call the global competency frameworks from all regions, all countries, all cultures from across the world. And one of their competencies is called interpersonally savvy. Their definition is to relate openly and comfortably with diverse groups of people. And these are the 5 skills, if I could just net them out quickly. Interpersonal savvy relates comfortably with people across levels, functions, cultures, and geography. Number 2, acts with diplomacy and tact. Number 3, builds rapport in an open, friendly, and accepting way. Number 4, builds constructive relationships with people, both similar and different to self. And number 5, picks up on interpersonal and group dynamic. And that's the global message that I think we can maybe tuck some of our gems within.
As we wrap up the episode today, I am stymied in some ways because there are so many things that Chip said that I want to emphasize, to reiterate. And yet, if I said everything that I wanted to reiterate, it would be basically like having the entire interview again. There were so many wonderful comments, so many wonderful takeaways from Chip. It is not hard to understand why he is such an exceptional developer of people one-on-one after you hear those comments from him. So here's a few things. And this may be the biggest thing. It certainly is a meta level thought. But if we're going to be great developers of others, it can't be about us as leaders. He talked about Greg Popovich saying we've got to get over ourselves. And time again, he reiterated that idea. He talked about the need to be secure and settled. We can't be engaged in this interaction with others for the sake of satisfying things within ourselves. I have a friend in the consulting world, a brilliant man named Sam Reed. Sam estimates that 60 to 70% of the things that we say to other people are really about us, are really about our own egos, are really about wanting to be seen as accomplished or valuable. And even if you think that number is way too high, just cut it in half. What if 30% of what I said is actually about me? What if I could cut that out? And Chip talked a little bit about some people feel like maybe their speak to listen ratio is 80 to 20. What if we were to reverse that ratio? But I combine what Chip was saying with Sam's idea. What you see is that we become much better developers of talent when we are not trying to prove ourselves to others, when we're not trying to be important or right, when we're settled about our own egos and value, then we have a much better opportunity to become great in one-on-one development with others. So that's important because we may have some work that we need to do within ourselves before we'll be able to be a great mentor and developer of others. Another thing I want to emphasize that Chip said is he talked about how he initiates with people. And in the midst of that, he talked about second and third level questions. I love that idea of understanding what is connecting, what is valuable to others, and pushing into those spaces. Now, many of Chip's examples in that section were about connecting with people you don't have a relationship with. But then we transitioned and talk about what about the people you work with on a day-to-day basis? And he brought up this idea of being an alongsider. this person who is alongside others as they walk through life, not just in a how do I get something out of you so I can achieve the organizational goal, but what does it really mean to be with other people in this journey we call life? I want you to hear that perspective because it is a key one for somebody who I see as an incredible mentor to leaders, somebody who is world class at one-on-one leadership development. This idea of seeing yourself and being an alongside-er. And then finally, as we transition to alongside-er mentality, it really begs the question, what are we really up to here as leaders? So all of that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today, and it's based on a quote from Chip. Here's the question. Are you using people to build projects or projects to build people? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.